we go again.
All right, and we are on the air. I want to welcome everybody into the Fifth Dimension podcast. And today on the show, I am joined by Jacqueline Claire, who is a spiritual realism artist, storyteller, and also host of the Spiritual Conversation podcast. I had the name written down, had to double check it. Jacqueline, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Evan. Glad to be here.
Yeah, such a pleasure to have you on. And I was checking out a lot of your work before having you on, and your art is fabulous, incredibly beautiful. I loved looking at the work that you're doing. It's truly incredible. Like I can see your unique gift that you're bringing into it. Like it's your creative expression. So I would encourage all the listeners to go and check it out, while listening to the podcast. But I'd love to start just by you talking about sort of your exploration into art and sort of, how you've come into finding yourself to where you are today and, doing what you're doing.
Okay, thank you. Well, that's so kind of you. I appreciate that. And I love that that's how you see my work, as sort of me finding and expressing that unique thing that I have to offer the world. And I think that's what we all want with our lives. Like, may we please give that unique thing that we have to make the world a better place. Yeah, gosh, so many directions I could go with this, but my work itself, you mentioned, it's spiritual realism. It's this niche and genre that I've carved out for myself, which is kind of like magical realism. People are often familiar with that, where there's a blending of real life with something magical or fantastic. And in my work, it's a blend of elements that are realistic. There's a tree, a moon, a landscape, a person, an animal, things that are you can recognize without using your imagination. And then there's an element of like abstract expressionism qualities in the paintings as well, that to me represent those unseen spiritual forces that are, surround us, and really that our lives are really about, that we're more spiritual beings having a human experience,
Right.
And my hope is that the work itself, like, kind of, encapsulates that in very fresh ways that help people connect with that in their own lives, and they're kind of like dreams. When I work, I don't usually have a concept of what I'm going to create. I take it one step at a time and just try to honor what's happening with the painting and then bring that out. So, a tree, a moon, a peacock, whatever it is might start to emerge. And it's kind of like symbols in a dream, and I might dream about a peacock, and you might dream about a peacock, and it might mean different things to us, and I hope that the paintings also kind of have that openness, like that it means something different to you and to me. And so that's my work in a nutshell, my fine art. I also illustrate. Maybe we'll talk about that in a bit. But, my journey into art has very much been like a homecoming. I come from a very creative family. I joke that if like someone became like a doctor or lawyer, they'd be the black sheep, or a
Right.
school teacher, like be like, oh, that's really weird, but good
Right.
for you. Everyone's very creative, and that's always been very nurtured in me. And my mom was really encouraging. She's a painter. She's my mentor. But as a child, like literally she let me draw on the walls, as a baby. And very strict in other ways, like as far as like the way I behaved, but the art, go for it. But I never really took it seriously. Like it was always a mode of expression for me. I find old journals of mine from like my teen years, and I'm like, wow, I drew a lot, but I never saw it. It was never something I particularly wanted to share. It was just like, oh yeah, this is what I do. But acting was my path for a very long time. And it was actually like in the belly of the beast, like living in LA, like totally going for it. And I was there for several years when I realized, I think this actually isn't working.
Right.
This 19-year path and investment is not really bringing me joy, and certainly not anyone else either. And I realized that the art had just been patiently waiting for me to recognize it, and
Mm,
it's that thing, like sort of the alchemist, realizing that your treasure was right there where you started, and you had to have all these experiences, which are great. And I developed a lot of skills and met a lot of amazing people and etc. But I had to have this whole journey to come back and be like, oh, this is what I meant to do.
right. That's beautiful. It's almost like a hero's journey, if you will. You go on this,
Yeah.
you go on this grand adventure, and I love how you use the word homecoming, because it is sort of like a reunion to like your true, authentic self, your authentic expression. And I've found myself on a similar path coming in alignment with my creativity, and I found there's a lot of vulnerability that's involved with that. A lot of like a willingness, because you mentioned like the idea of not necessarily wanting to share it out, like it was sort of kept to yourself, like that creative expression. I mean, have you found that coming into yourself, like as an artist, there is like it took that level of like almost like a leap of faith, if you will, into vulnerability, a willingness to venture in and be like, all right, I'm just going to authentically be me and just sort of go for it?
Oh, sure. It's all, I mean, yeah, everything I put out is like so 100% me.
Mhm.
So it is like you're putting, if people don't like it, it's like, oh, it's such a deep rejection. But,
Mm,
on the flip side, that was part of what held me back as an actor. I loved it. I love the psychology of acting. I love so many things about it. And I
mm,
definitely, I started doing it very young, and it was recognized very early that like I had talent and all that stuff.
mhm,
But I found that no, I just had the hardest time getting out of the mindset of wanting people to like me or accept me. And that's a killer for an actor, like even though you are putting yourself in that position, if you're auditioning and that sort of thing, if you're in that mindset of like, please validate me, please accept me, please like my dog and pony show, it
mhm,
it kills the art of it. And I just had the hardest time stepping away from that. And in the art, even though it's totally me, I'm not using someone else's script, I'm not hiding behind a character, it's all me. I also found a lot of confidence in that. Like, this is me, take it or leave it. Yes, it's me on the line, but I feel
mhm.
confident about it, and there you go.
Right. And generally when you feel confident about it and you are fully like expressing you, I found like for in my own experience, that's when people a lot of times will come out and say, "Wow, this is so beautiful. This is so unique." Like it's truly it's that validation. Like once it's kind of paradoxical once we detach from the validation, like I'm not even I don't need it anymore. Like that's sort of when we almost receive it in a lot of ways, which is it's kind of crazy how that works. But I mean, where would you say like doing the work now, where is a lot of your influences stemming from? What sort of I know you talk about sort of just allowing it to flow out, which I think is a beautiful creative process, and really the nature of creativity is just sort of letting it flow. But where do you tend to gain a lot of your influences, and what sort of I guess yeah, just what sort of influences do you have on the art?
Totally. And I totally agree with you too. Like, isn't it so like frustrating sometimes, those paradoxes of life? Like when you let go is when it comes. And
Right,
it's like,
exactly.
and there's no way to like trick the universe or fake it. I'm going to
Yeah.
pretend like I'm letting go, so you'll bring it to me.
Right, when deep
um,
down it's still in there. It's like
exactly.
it picks up on it. We can't hide.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Um, Gosh, so my faith is a big part of my life. I'm a Baha'i, and it's this beautiful, globally minded faith about the oneness of mankind and the powerful day and age in which we live.
Mhm,
I read the Baha'i writings a lot and the Baha'i prayers every day, and they're very rich in imagery and symbolism, as I think most spiritual texts are. The like using metaphor and, you know, celestial glory and that sort of thing. So I'm sure that percolates in my subconscious. I live in a really beautiful place, and that's intentional because I know how much nature feeds me.
Yeah.
And I like to really appreciate it. And I try to take a walk every day at sunset. So just like, you know, let life come to me and appreciate it while it's happening. And then when I'm in the studio, without realizing it, it'll come through. You know, I'm working on a painting right now, which is so clearly like an homage to this beautiful spot that I live. And it's like this little magical forest. But it isn't like I necessarily set out to do that, but I always like wanted to. So, and if, you know, back in the day when I used to travel, you know,
the good old
BC,
days.
yeah, before COVID, you know, I would like maybe 3 months later start to see the influence of a trip that I had taken like come through in my work. So those are the most consistent places of inspiration for me, just how I live and what I try to consume visually and spiritually. And then as far as like other creators that inspire me, I mean, my mom is a huge influence. Her name's Sabrina Laumer. She's a painter. Our work is very similar, but mine is kind of like the next generation. You can see that. And then, you know, I love artists like C.S. Lewis, who's the writer who wrote Narnia. And he was able to make like really excellent, you know, just like perfect pieces of commercial, you know, children's work. But then he infused it with his spiritual belief. So you can read it from a spiritual perspective, or you can read it just for fun. And either way, they work. And I love the old Twilight Zone. It's like, you know, super commercial. I mean, Rod Serling was always very direct that, you know, we're just here to sell product. Right. But then it's like, no, not really. If you really pay attention to those episodes, there's some profound stuff in there, you know?
Right. Definitely. I love when you can sort of tap into those projects like the Twilight Zone. And it's like, oh, I see where you're coming from. Like, I understand the deeper underlying like truths that you're sort of tapping into right here. And I definitely have influences similar to that. And I would love to ask about the Baha'i Faith in particular, because I wasn't actually familiar with it until, you know, I stumbled upon your work and invited you on the show. And I did a little bit of research on it, but I'm sure I'm not the only one who doesn't necessarily know a lot about it. I mean, do you want to speak to it and what sort of, what it's all about and how its principles influence your life, and like what, you know, because I understand it's a fairly new religion. So, I mean, what is it all about? And like, speak to.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, cool. So okay. Let's see, where do we start? Yeah, so it is a very young faith. It started in the mid 1800s in Persia. And, you know, that in itself is really fascinating. You know, I often hear people who are religious, spiritual, both, you know, both and either or, you know, say that sometimes it's hard to adapt their spiritual text or their spiritual beliefs to the modern day. Right. And, you know, the 1800s wasn't yesterday, but it was also pretty recent. I mean, they had cameras, you know what I mean?
Right.
So the Baha'i Faith has, you know, a lot of teachings that really speak to today's interconnectedness, today's technological advancement, and that sort of thing. And the Baha'i Faith is monotheistic, believes in this loving creator God that we call lots of different names in lots of different cultures. It's this loving creative source that is so much bigger and greater than us that we can't, you know, sit down and draw a picture and say exactly what, you know, God is. But God wants to, you know, teach us and communicate with us. So this is the purpose of all of the great world religions. Like, they're part of this unfolding education of humankind. So Baha'is respect all of the major world religions as true and valid. And Baha'is believe in, some wild ideas like men and women are equal, that science
Truly
and
wild.
yeah, especially in Persia in the mid 1800s, that science and religion should agree. The more we understand both, the more we will see this, and that given this interconnected day and age, the most important thing is the elimination of all forms of prejudice, and to really work together, as a human collective, and also in our personal lives, both and to work together to make the world a better place.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And uh, I've always been a big believer in, like, I myself, like, am not, like, I didn't grow up in a religious household, so I've sort of discovered spirituality just through the lens of my own experience and awakening to it and having these experiences. But as I've read different religious texts, I've been finding it validating, whether it's in Christianity or Islam. And it's a lot of these principles that come out, speak to this interconnectivity and speak to this oneness. And what I've been reading about the Baha'i Faith is that I love it. It it draws on all these same pillars and does bring it more into the modern age. And speaking of interconnectivity and how we can evolve forward and move forward. And I think that's what the true principles of religion should be, because there's so much institutionalization with a lot of, we look at, Christianity, the church, and all of them
Yeah.
have the examples of particular dualistic, some of the go down the slippery slope with that one. But what I love about the Baha'i Faith is it really does stick to those principles. And I think living from that state is what's going to bring us to the next step. I think that's sort of
Mm.
the next evolution of mankind, is coming together in unity. And that's only going to be recognized when we when we all tap into this interconnectivity and this oneness and this unity. And I mean, I see the book in the background that you have there, Humanity is
Yes.
One. Like, it very much
Yes.
speaks to exactly what we're talking
Yes.
about. And
Yeah.
I feel like all great, so much of the art and so much of the creativity and so much of my own creativity is very much inspired by those principles. And, like, how can we
Mhm.
sort of tell this story of interconnectingness and, like, get people to uniquely express that in their own ways. And I think creativity and art is probably, I'm a big believer, like, that is what's going to help us uh move into that next step. It's sort of a little bit of an
Mhm.
unknown, but I don't know if you wanted to speak to that in terms of creativity and art and how that can help individuals sort of awaken to that and to that true nature. But I'm a firm believer in that, because exploring myself creatively is what's allowed me to tap into that interconnectivity and truly feel it and, like, embody it. So, and it's truly been a blessing. Like, my life has never been, like, personally better because I'm living in that interconnect. Like, I feel that interconnectivity.
Wow. Totally. I love that. And I agree with you so much. I mean, any concept of a higher being that I know of uh, involves creativity. It involves creating, fashioning. And, you know, in religious traditions, we're told that like mankind has been created in the image of God. And
Mm,
like, so like that ability to create, to fashion that which did not exist before,
mm,
which is like whether you're creatively making a meal or you're writing a song or you're making a piece of visual art, it's something that didn't exist before you put those elements together and made it. Like, this is an expression of our spiritual being. And if we want to create lives and a world that has never existed before, right? You mentioned
mhm,
evolution, like something that is next level. Well, then we're going to have to use creativity,
mm.
like, and
Right.
oftentimes when you're making art, like, you're aiming at something. You have an imagination and you're aiming at it and you're putting the legwork into it. But at some point you have to go with what's happening. Like something's going to happen that you weren't expecting. And you're like, oh man, that's even better, and that's like a creative openness and sort of like it's kind of like a big word, but like you become a channel, right, for
Right.
something else. So I think in sort of abstract terms, this is a use of creativity for ushering in that next level for our own lives and for the world.
Definitely. And I would agree. And you mentioned sort of having the unexpected come up. And like, I think what held me back for so long was that unexpected. And when we hit that like snag, if you will, of, oh no, it didn't turn out the exact way I was anticipating it. There's almost like an element of fear with like of the unknown, fear of the, uh, of venturing into this part because there is so much unknown. Creating is a grand unknown. We don't know exactly what's going to be the turnout. So I think there's a definite need to almost drop expectations and allow it to flow. And I think with how we've been living, like societally, I think expectations are something that we just attach to everything. Like we've been taught
Yeah.
to attach expectations. I mean, is that something you've seen, in your own artwork, like at first when you're maybe venturing back into artwork from acting, like this idea of expectations, or maybe working with other artists, do you find that you know maybe the first creative snag is that need to almost control and that expectations that we hold?
Yeah, absolutely. There's this funny list that I've seen online, just like it floats around. And it's like the 5 steps of creativity or something like
Hmm.
that. And it's like, first step is like, ooh, this is awesome. Second step is like, oh God, this is, this is crap. And then it's like, no, I am crap. And like it goes through like all of these like really dark phases. And
Hmm.
then it like comes back to like, this is awesome. and I think there's a lot of like spiritual training when you're making art. Like you do have, it is this sort of like wrestle with all of those like ultimately egoic and fearful forces within us that try to keep us small and try to
Mm,
hold us back. Oh, it's not going to be perfect. What will people say? They're not going to like it. Oh, you quit your job for this, like
right,
whatever
right.
it is. Sorry, the light.
Oh, you're good.
I'm becoming one of my paintings with stripes on them. Um, yeah, you have to like battle through. And that's part of what's so beautiful about artwork is that like the human being, the fallible, scared, flawed human being who made this work went through all of those stages and they persevered. And then now we all get to enjoy it.
Right, definitely. And I feel like once you've had the experience of that full cycle of coming back to the point of this is awesome again, like it makes it much easier to continue going through it, because every time you go through a creative process, like it's almost like the journey restarts. It's like you have those phases of like, oh no, this is gonna be this could be a disaster. What am I doing? Like and it's almost like a continuous loop, like it. And
Mhm.
I think I found that life in general, whether it be creativity or you're taking a leap to start a new job, it's always that you have to venture out, you have to explore, you have to be
Yeah.
willing to take a leap of faith and just trust yourself, trust in the process. And um, I think that self-trust is something that we really lack as a society, and it's what
Hmm.
it's what causes so much of the angst and division and the duality that we
Mm.
see. So, I, and I would say, with trust, I think maybe it comes with, for me, I found with connecting to sort of the heart space, connecting in with what it is that the heart
Mhm.
wants. I mean, would you say the paintings themselves, it more comes from that heart instead of
Mhm.
the logical thinking mind, which is which is where the fear comes from, which is where the doubt comes from? I mean, you want to speak to like the importance of connecting with the heart, and maybe how as a artist you can do that?
Yeah. Well, I think everything you've said is really profound, about it's like a fear of it's the fear that has caused so much of the division that we have in our
Mm,
own psyches and in our relationships and in our world right now. And I feel that making art in and of itself, yes, every time you make something, you're getting on the roller coaster again.
mhm,
But I think you can also allow that process to continually build your confidence. Like, well, I've been here before. I've heard those mean inner voices or those fearful voices. I hear you, and you weren't right last time. So I'm going to keep going. Like, you
right.
build a confidence. And I also think that's how other people's artwork can inspire us as well. Like somebody who has, like one of my original paintings in their home that has that energy, or
Mhm,
me listening to a musician's song. Like, it's like we're like sending messages to each other. Like, remember, this painting was created, like I got through those gremlin voices. Brene Brown calls them the gremlins, and you
mm,
can too. Whatever it is, like you can get through those. So I think just the act of doing it, uh, collectively, cumulatively, addresses that heart relationship.
mm,
Um, and I think I think there's a just profound simplicity to just like tuning into your heart, and nothing fancy about it. Just like, oh God, I haven't really like ever tried to check in with it before,
mhm,
and it may not manifest in complete sentences or anything. This is your heart speaking.
right.
um but I think you will find that there's like a seat of consciousness
Mm,
there,
right,
that kind of says like, thank you for noticing me. I've just been here.
right. Absolutely. And it's more of an embodied feeling than anything else. Like it's not a, 'cause you're right. The heart doesn't do what the mind does. The mind is always just chattering, yapping at us, like giving us those full rational thoughts that can be detrimental. We can train them to be positive, but I think the heart speaks beyond the words. It speaks in an unwritten language that's uh, difficult to put into words because it you
Hmm.
know it doesn't do justice. Language is just our way of rationalizing our surroundings, really our physical world. So it's
Right.
and I found when connecting in with the heart, it's very much a uh, I feel like all of the answers, everything that we're seeking, oftentimes, like if we just sort of tap into the heart, it very much will just guide us. Like it doesn't, like we don't need to over complicate, overthink, it all exists within the heart space. Like it's all right there. And I would say creative confidence in the, like I just finished typing up a book, like the manuscript of it, and it all came once I decided to tap into the heart space. Like, and it
Mm.
there was such a long period of time where I was like, oh, I want to do this, and sort of when you logically think it through, eventually it's just like, all right, I'm going to tune into the heart, see what it wants, and it was written in a month. So
Wow.
it was all right there, but it was just, what does the heart want to do? How can I let the heart flow through? And I feel like that's going to be unique for everybody, like, and
Mhm.
that's why art, creativity, like it's never going to be like there's always going to be something new. Like it's always going to continue, and I feel like that's almost uh the see, I'm speaking from the heart. I don't know if I have the words for it. It's like it's what defines humanity. Like it's what makes us unique and makes us
Mm.
special, if you will. Um,
Mhm.
there's not much of a question in there, but I don't know if you wanted to speak to that and like your own experience with that concept, and how it
Mhm.
can continue to be something that moves us forward in that regard, connecting in with the heart and that, creative element that it brings.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree, and I think the more you honor those feelings, the more you are guided by them, and the more you shut them down, the crustier you get and the harder it is to connect with them, though not impossible. Um, you know, kind of related, I think it's another part of this. When I first started really applying myself to art, it's going to make me sound a little bit crazy, but I think people relate to it too. I became palpably aware, like almost with like a mental picture of some of my like gremlins, like the character of the voices that would try to put me down and hold me back.
Right.
And you know, sometimes it was sort of like a panel of, you know, a handful of people that I've known in my life, and I think, oh, what would they say? And you know, of course they don't actually care, you know, but like for some reason I had put them in this like, you know, panel of judges in my head that I was always trying to like, you know, rationalize things to, instead of just like, you know, why wasn't my heart center the only place I was seeking approval, you know? But it was, and then I also had this sense of like this kind of like hipster, like male figure who was like around a street corner with a cigarette, like wearing a leather jacket, like judging me. And it was so bizarre. I mean, it's like a weird thing, but it was like kind of like this sly, like this sort of sly, smug, like, oh, you think you're something. You think you can do this. You think, you know. And once I like finally like kind of grabbed a hold of this, like that is a weird character to have in my head.
Right.
And I sort of in my own way kind of like dialogued with it and was like, okay, so this like entity, this whatever it is judging me and holding me back and like saying that I'll never like accomplish anything or whatever. And I'm like, but you're not even real. Like you haven't accomplished anything. You don't even exist.
Right.
So anyway, that's just like a really kind of weird tangent, but somebody out there, maybe they need to hear this, that like, you know, the just kind of ridiculous blocks that come in our way. And just how happy would we be? And what would we be giving to the world if we just fired all those bastards and just like, just honored that loving core of ourselves.
Right. 100%. And I definitely relate to that tangent because I think when you go inward, you sort of recognize all the different characters and the parts of yourself like that have stemmed from years of conditioning, and it's like an accumulation of all the voices that you've heard. And like, you know, I think a lot of it stems from, you know, childhood and your upbringing, and you're basically taught to you think you need to fill a certain role. You know, you see all the influences of society and what we think we're supposed to be, and status and image. And I think all those voices tend to get they tend to just influence who we think we're supposed to be, instead of you know, it goes back to those expectations. We hold the expectations about ourselves, like we should be meeting X, Y, and Z as a standard, and then it's, well, trying to hold to that standard, it's not real. Like it doesn't actually exist. We should just be who we are authentically, and then that should be enough. And you know, I something I actually wrote about this a little bit in the book that I was talking about is children in particular. When I look at children, like young children especially, like I see the purity, like the innocence and that creative sense and that imagination like running wild. Like, and it's beautiful because I think that shows that this creativity, it exists in everybody. Like everybody has this within them. And then just through the years, it sort of gets squashed, if you will. Like it gets further and further repressed, like you mentioned. And, you know, I think just like how you said at the beginning, it was sort of like coming home to the art, like allowing that to sort of play and allow it to breathe can be a homecoming, can be a return to ourselves, you know, who it is we're meant to be. So I don't know. I always try and tell people to like find that inner child, if you will. I don't know if that's something you've had to you found on your own journey that, like you mentioned the homecoming, but I think everybody has that creativity in them. It's just about finding the ways to bring it out. Like how can you authentically express you? Like what does that inner child want? Like how can you nurture it, love it? And that's going to be different for everybody, I suppose. It's going to be unique. But
Yeah.
and I don't know if you wanted to speak to that and like how you how you
Yeah.
found, and if you've worked with others and helping find that sort of creative voice, but what your thoughts might be on that.
Yes, I have. And I agree with you. And I got to say, Evan, you gave me the most amazing segue to talk about my children's book.
Oh,
Actually,
wonderful.
this is one of the prototypes of it. It's called Noble Beings, and it's a spiritual handbook for children of all ages. Wink, wink. Because exactly what you spoke of. One, the idea of helping children harness those incredible qualities that they already have of joy and trust and friendliness and acceptance. I mean, and children are just usually so amazing at this sort of like, hello world.
Right.
I have love to give, and I am a unique being,
Right.
And I know my spiritual journey has a lot of, it has been like sort of this like reclaiming of those sort of lost qualities. And I just thought, wouldn't it be amazing to help children harness those qualities and mature with them instead of having to lose them and find them again?
Right. Right.
And then also I hope my book will help adults reconnect with that, And so it's just a collection of really short quotations from the Baha'i writings, which is like really sweet illustrations. So like this one is let your vision be world embracing rather than confined to your own self. So just stuff like that. It's like really
beautiful.
profound and really sweet at the same time. I know all the lights, the crazy light I have right now. So that's my book. November 9th it comes out. So you open the door for that one. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. And I love that because, I mentioned I worked at a school. I don't know if I said it on or off the podcast, but I work in a school, and something by the time they're in high school, which is where I'm at, they a lot of them have sort of been disconnected from that creativity, that wonder. I love when like kids, like, I don't know, I found little kids, they always will come up, like, I won't even know them. They'll just come out of nowhere and they'll just say these crazy things to me as a complete stranger. And I'm just like, yeah, that's awesome. And it's like to see that like in all of these kids, it's just like, how can we as a society keep that, harness that, like allow that to flow naturally? Because I think harnessing that in the younger generations is what's going to, we spoke of the type of world that we want to live in collectively. I think if we can allow that to be harnessed, allow that to play out naturally, like that, like the younger generations will create that world if we can allow them to nurture those qualities. And it's I coming from the perspective of working in a school, it's something I struggle with because there's so many like academic standards, so many things that they like that I see that I'm just like, oh my gosh, like it drives me insane, like to think about, like, because I see myself in a lot of the students who lost that connection, because I lost the connection myself. Like and it's very much a there's no, I don't know if anyone has concrete answers exactly how we how we do that, but it's the child is just this ball of joy and innocence, and it warms my heart to see that you're doing that work, because I think that's amazing. That's like what we need collectively. I mean, what was it that inspired you to make that book and bring that to fruition? You said it comes out November 9th. That's really soon. That's wonderful.
I don't know when this episode's going to air, but the order window is November 9th through December 9th for the initial launch. So we'll see how it goes. Well, gosh, you've said so many profound things. I think, it's sort of like an Eden story, the sort of being cast out of the Garden of Eden, and then humanity struggles to get back to it. And that's sort of like each of our stories. And I do believe that it's possible to not get cast out of Eden. And I'm not exactly sure. I don't know the bullet point to-do list of how to help nurture generation to not have to take the hard road.
Right.
But I am doing my best, and this is a start. And, in 2017, I was shopping for a present for a really precocious 6-year-old who's like, 6 is such an amazing age where like they're still totally a child and totally have that hello world quality. And then I'm turning into a zebra.
The sunlight's
and
just beaming on you.
I know. But then they also have like this budding intellect, and they're starting to read, and you can have like intelligent conversations with them and stuff. And I wanted something that would both be totally fun and delightful for her. Not like, here's this, spiritual pill you have to swallow, like something that she would want to hold on to and read. But that would also contain like these really profound lifelong truths. And my hope is that she might just like almost accidentally, just because she loved on the book so much, like memorize these and have sort of this mental database of like, oh, what's the spiritual principle in this experience, or like, lessons on being generous or courteous or having an attitude of acceptance towards other people.
Right.
So I would think that's got to play a part in helping people like really stay in touch with their spiritual nobility and beautiful power,
Right. Absolutely. And I think really that is, what it will take to sort of have that be more of a collective a norm for children to stay in touch with that, sort of just the introduction of it at a younger age where they learn about these truths that are applicable, and sort of just applying that into their daily lives. And we're not going to uproot the foundation of society overnight necessarily, but it's one of those where, because there are more and more people who are in the younger generation who are I kind of generalized earlier when I said I work in a high school, and there's students who are, it made it sound like morbid in a sense, but there's I do think there's a lot more of the younger generation that is in touch and able to sort of live by these truths, and they're becoming more accessible. So it's almost sort of like a domino effect, if you will, right? And I think you living out your purpose and creating a book like this, and that helps x amount of kids, and somebody else living out their purpose and being creative and introducing these concepts, I think just over time creates that that foundation that is available. And I like to think of it in the sense that humanity is still like super young. Like, I mean, we're still figuring everything out. Like, we still have all of our like hunter-gatherer impulses, and like that explains tribalism and why we're so divided. And there's just so many things that we've been like that don't necessarily serve us in the modern age, that are just part of us in like evolutionarily. So as we continue to grow and evolve, we will figure out like what is the methods that do lead to everybody living by their purpose,
Right.
everybody being the best versions of themselves, and creating a world of love and peace. Because I think that's what everybody wants, but we just don't know exactly. We're just figuring out how to get there. And I think I don't know. I feel optimistic about that. Like, I'm not a doomsday, whatever you'd call it. Like the world is ending tomorrow. I think we're growing and evolving, and that's truly a beautiful book. I'm probably going to like buy that book because I would love to have that in a classroom. So, and I'd love if we're approaching an hour. I don't want to go too much over an hour. So I'd love it if you could speak to like what you see as like the role of the artist and the visionary, like going forward, like what being in touch with that side of ourselves. How do you see that transcending, could say, the collective, and what
Mm.
what you hope for the future in that regard, if you wanted to speak
Yeah.
about.
Yeah. Well, on humanity being young, I just want to comment on that. In the Baha'i Faith, it's often mentioned that like humanity is in its adolescence, like we're on the brink of maturing. But like if you think about an adolescent, like we're rebellious, like we're throwing out, I don't want your old traditions, I don't want gender, I don't want like all these things.
Right.
And our hormones are going crazy, and like we're like, what do I do with myself? But it's like it's a stage we have to go through to like become mature and move to that next stage. And as far as the role of the arts and artists, well, I think we've talked a lot about like heart center and that sort of thing. At the end of the day, we can talk a whole lot about really great ideas, right? And we can use logic and rationalize, and all of those things are important. But it is the heart that moves people, and it is the heart that transforms. And art can really bypass all of this and go for the heart and help awaken people to new ideas and inspire new ways of being, and I think art is super powerful, and I think that is a double-edged sword. I think a lot of the art in this adolescent time of chaos right now, which again, I think a lot of it's necessary, and I'm not judging it, but I think a lot of the art is coming from a place of lower nature, and it sort of is created by ego, and it serves ego, and it's powerful, man. We hear these messages all day long, and we see them all day long, and it's reaping a certain result. And I think, imagine if it was serving another purpose. What if it was coming from the heart center and it was touching the heart center, And I think, like in my book, I thought a lot about like how, say I want to draw something about truthfulness. Okay, that's like such a concept. How do I do that? And how do I show truthfulness without depicting lying? Sort of like, how do I depict health without showing illness? And again, not that I'm afraid of the dark flip side. I think it should be recognized and honored, but like, how do I help envision the positive that we're aiming for?
Right.
And that was quite an exercise for me personally. And I think that's part of the role of an artist of all kinds of mediums. How do we envision what we're aiming for instead of just talking about everything we don't like? What might it look like,
Right. Absolutely. I love that, because we do have to, instead of when we focus on the flip side, because you're right, it does need to be recognized, and like we need to know what that is. But okay, how do we envision it? How do we create it? And I think that is so beautifully what I see the role of the artist as well. Like I'm sort of still new in stepping into my creativity. Like it's been sort of really in the past year where I've felt comfortable exploring creative modalities, like just full send from the heart. And like, but I've seen that within myself. Like, how can I create what it is that I'm feeling from the heart? And it can be a true challenge, but it's one that I think humanity, like you're saying, it's in its adolescence, which I love that analogy. And I think that's so true with all that's going on. It feels very chaotic. Like, but how can we take that next step and create what we feel, what we know is to be true? And it's very abstract, but it doesn't come from the logical mind. It's really, like, we can't put it into words, but I think everybody can tap into that in a unique way with that trust, with that self-love. And that's such a beautiful, that's a truly beautiful like concept. I love that. Like I don't have words for it because it comes from the heart space, but
That's often the challenge. That's great. I love it.
Yeah, well, words are important for podcasts supposedly, but I'm sure everybody can like
Can they just
feel.
feel the love?
I think so. It has a radiance. It has an energy. I'm gonna assume they can feel it and tap into that as well. Um, awesome. I love that. I mean, that feels like a pretty good place to leave like the listeners. Like because I'm feeling good. I think that's like I don't know. I would encourage everyone to feel into that and express themselves in a unique way. Like, what is it? How can you express that? How can you create that? So, Jacqueline, is there anywhere like you'd want to send the listeners, like to maybe interact with your work, find your book? Like, what? I'll link it all in the episode description, like for them to just click on. But where would you like to send them and interact with you more?
Sure. Thanks for the invitation. Well, while we have everyone like super happy and inspired, I do want to send them to their own place of creativity. I think
Mm,
everyone has like a little sense of, oh, I really wish I was cooking more, or I really want to knit, or I really want to write. I have a story in my heart, but I think I'm a terrible writer. The only way you'll get better is to do it. And no one has to see it until you're ready. Just do it. And
mm,
whatever that is, carve out, make time. There's never going to be a good time. You have to make it
mm.
and do it. And as far as me, yes, I would super love for everyone to connect with me. So I'm Jacqueline Claire Art.com on Facebook, Instagram, Patreon, Jacqueline Claire Art, spelled the traditional American way. And yes, my podcast is Spiritual Conversation. And my book is called Noble Beings. And again, that'll be on all my platforms. And yeah, Jacqueline Claire Art.
Awesome. Wonderful. I love that you sent them to the creative space. Like I don't think anybody I've had on the podcast has sent them to like, that was where they sent them initially. So I love that
That's their assignment.
that's the assignment. I love that. We're giving you guys homework. Wonderful. Awesome. Well, I'll put all those links in the episode description, like I said, so they can just scroll on down and click it. And I would encourage everyone to go check out your work because it's fantastic. You're definitely everything that we talked about and what you're embodying. It comes through in the art and your vision and this heart space that we talked about. I can definitely see that and feel that from your work. So I greatly appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your message. I think this was a lot of fun.
Thank you. I agree. It was great.
That's great. Awesome. So that'll wrap up the show. I'll just press pause on the recording.